Have you ever seen a film about a man walrus before?
Ho 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 ho! Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we are taking a look at one of Kevin Smith's steps outside the View-esque universe. Kevin Smith is truly a wonderful filmmaker. Clerks is one of the greatest independent films of all time. Chasing Amy is one of the most powerful examinations of love and sexuality that I've ever seen, and Jay and Silent Bob Reboot is one of only 3 films from the past 3 years that I would give 4.5 stars out of 5 to. When it comes to Tusk, it's not one of his more highly regarded films, but I do also feel like it doesn't exactly get enough appreciation. Tusk is a 2014 body horror comedy film which stemmed from an idea that was previously discussed on Kevin Smith's Smodcast. They were talking about someone who had placed an ad on Gumtree where they were offering a living situation free of charge if the tenant agreed to dress in a walrus suit. It turns out this ad was placed as a joke, but over the course of the episode, Kevin Smith and his longtime collaborator Scott Mosier actually fleshed out the narrative that would end up becoming Tusk. I have seen every single Kevin Smith film, and there have only ever been 2 that I didn't actually like. One of them was Red State, which was well acted and intense, but I didn't feel carried a sufficient story. The other was Jersey Girl, which surprised me in just how generic and lifeless it was. But with Tusk, when I first saw this in cinemas, I was both horrified and pissing myself. The second time I watched it, I still had that reaction, but it was honestly funnier to me. On the third viewing, I found that it was a bit drawn out, talkative and long, but the shock value was still there. If you don't know what to expect from Tusk, the central plot twist and the powerful imagery can come across as shocking, but you won't get that same effect if you're watching this video. If you're serious about watching Tusk one day, I'd advise you to do that instead of watching my video. Nonetheless, you guys are here supporting me, so I appreciate it. Let's delve into the movie. The film starts off with Justin Long and, of all people, Haley Joel Osment. They run a politically incorrect podcast,
reminding you to join the Nazi party.
Justin Long's character is Wallace Brighton, a shamelessly arrogant host who intends on flying to Winnipeg, Manitoba to interview a YouTube sensation known as the Kill Bill Kid. I don't need to tell you what this is a reference to, and the special effects in this scene aren't necessarily amazing, but Kevin Smith films aren't movies that rely on CGI, so this doesn't really matter.
You got your can of do's, and you got your can of don'ts. Top shelf right there, number 1. Don't go telling a Canadian you don't follow hockey.
Oh, of course. I should have known that. Makes him sad, right?
Canadian doesn't get sad. Sadness was made by the USA.
This scene really hurts for me to watch. I mean, it's one of the funniest scenes in the film, but I was meant to be flying to Canada this year. I was going to see the East Side, the West Side, and Winnipeg, Manitoba. God damn it, COVID.
Right there on our flag. It's right there when you look at it and you see past that sacred maple leaf. You know what you see?
White wall.
You see that in America, you may be red, white, and blue. But in Canada, you're red, white, but never blue, eh? Is that a new stereotype?
That's good.
Never heard of a Canadian high five either.
Nazi party.
Oh, no. It's spelled Notsee, not the other Haiti one. You know the Hitler.
You don't say Hitler in an airport.
This whole scene is just gold. Wallace journeys to the Kill Bill Kid's house, only to learn that he's committed suicide. Later on in a bar, he finds a note from an old man who lives in Manitoba who claims to have stories to tell. Not wanting to have wasted the trip, he journeys up to meet the guy.
How far is Bifrost from here?
Bifrost? Shit, that's far. Yeah, it's about 2 hours from here.
Yeah, the kids here at the convenience store are telling me that it's about 2 hours away.
I hate American guys.
Here we have Harley Quinn Smith and Lily Rose Depp, the daughters of Kevin Smith and Johnny Depp. This movie is a family affair. Wallace travels to the house of the old man, Howard Howe.
Now, Mr. Howe would be appropriate, but I prefer the intimacy of Howard.
Then we get 15 straight minutes of conversation between the two, which is just them getting to know each other, as well as a few flashbacks, which include Wallace actually recording his podcast and Howard meeting Ernest Hemingway. None of this really advances the plot at all, it's just primarily a showcase for the natural charisma of the 2 stars, who admittedly are both very talented. There's also a moment where Wallace jacks off a walrus genital bone. As a horror film, obviously this scene is meant to keep audiences on the edge as the film builds up atmosphere and waits for the horror to strike, but nothing of any particular relevance until Howard finally starts talking about getting lost at sea and meeting a walrus, a creature which he has a deep fascination for. Then Wallace passes out, presumably because Howard has pulled a Bill Cosby with a T. Then we get another flashback. There is a lot of flashbacks in Tusk because the film does not follow a typical chronological story structure. Unfortunately, these flashbacks never really do enough to actually justify their existence. This one shows Wallace's girlfriend asking if she can join him on the trip to Canada, which he refuses, as well as criticizing him for exploiting the Kill Bill Kid.
The Wallace I fell in love with would not do that. The Wallace I fell in love with would never say this stupid
The Wallace
ass
you
shit.
fell in love with was an unfunny little dickhole who used to make bad Star Wars puns and couldn't pay his bills. I'm sorry, but I kind of prefer the new Wallace.
This entire scene is meant to characterize Wallace as a narcissist, but you don't need 4.5 minutes of flashback to tell us this. You can work this kind of stuff into the scenes leading up to Wallace arriving at Howard's house. You don't need to just stop the story for so long to tell us that he's an asshole. We cut back to Wallace in Howard's house. He wakes up and Howard delivers a monologue claiming that while passed out, his leg was bitten by a brown recluse spider and a doctor had to perform an emergency procedure.
There's no leg there.
Nature can be very red in tooth and claw.
I need a phone. I gotta call my family.
Dr. Mousse removed all the phones from the house. He didn't want you disturbed.
Oh, How convenient.
I am truly sorry for your loss.
Just what is going on in that guy's head? This scene goes on for 6.5 minutes and it really just goes in circles, and that's one of the big issues with Tusk. Kevin Smith is able to build good atmosphere with his scenes, but then he shoots himself in the foot by having them go on for way too long. This issue continues into the next scene as Howard and Wallace eat dinner.
What did it look like?
The arachnid assailant?
Yeah.
Well, typical spider.
What do you expect him to say to that? It's a fucking spider. It probably has 8 legs, fangs, and is brown.
The itty bitty spider crawled up the water spout.
Holy shit.
Now came the rain and washed the spider out.
Let me out of this chair, you fucking psycho! Let me out! Let me out, you old fucking nutbag!
What a twist.
I've been constructing a very realistic walrus suit.
Okay, now the conversation starts to get relevant.
Is man indeed a walrus at heart?
No.
Another flashback to Wallace's girlfriend Allie, who delivers a monologue about how she hates herself for being in a relationship with Wallace. Genesis Rodriguez shows us that she's a very good actress in this scene, but again, this really doesn't need to be here. Then it cuts to another flashback of Wallace's podcast with Teddy, and the entire scene tells us nothing except that Wallace cheats on Allie when he's out on the road. Yeah, it's just another scene to remind us that Wallace is in fact an asshole, if you didn't already know that. We get it. Like, this scene is obviously meant to have audiences challenging their sympathies for the character, but you could show us all this before Wallace had even left for Canada. Don't stop the story when the story itself should be trying to get into an interesting place. She tries calling Wallace, and for some reason Howard decided to leave Wallace's phone functional and in a very accessible location, even though that could literally compromise his entire plan. He calls her back and tries to explain the situation.
I don't want to die in Canada. I don't want to die at all.
Oh yeah, she's apparently sleeping with Teddy, and he ignores Wallace's call, but it doesn't make any sense to me that they leave their phones charging in the bathroom. Obviously this way they're more likely to miss any attempt by Wallace to contact them, but it just isn't realistic. In the modern day consumerist world, we always leave our phones at finger's reach. If we need to charge them, we charge them near where we are sleeping. Fact. Howard comes in and knocks him out.
Your life as you knew it is over, Mr. Brighton. So if you wish to continue living, you will be a walrus, or you will be nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
Allie gets his message the next morning as Howard is continuing to mutilate Wallace's body, all while telling us his story as a Duplessis orphan. And this is a reference to a real life time in history where Quebec Premier Maurice Duplessis actually took 20,000 orphan children and moved them to mental hospitals. And this is because turning the orphanages into mental hospitals or constructing new mental hospitals resulted in a large amount of government subsidies. It is estimated that the government saved $57.2 million in 2020 dollars by doing this, as well as the fact that religious institutions ended up raising over $103 million as a result of doing this. Most of them were Catholic. And the children experienced a lot of mistreatment by the people who run these institutions.
I was beaten. I was tortured. I was raped.
This is a shocking piece of history, one that I didn't even know about before I started doing my research on Tusk. But the fact that the film just uses this as an excuse to make the character more insane, like, if you're going to use this, actually do something to explore it. Don't just use it as a gimmick.
Man is a savage animal, Mr. Brighton. Better to be a walrus.
Yes, we get it. Man is the real animal. Jesus, the constant comparisons between man and walrus in this film is so loud, repetitive, and just downright fucking annoying. Howard completes his surgery, and after we get a few shots of Wallace in his walrus suit, we finally get the big reveal.
You look like Freddy Krueger face fucking topographical map of Utah.
The design of the man walrus is downright terrifying. It finds a fine line between being absurd and real, and in both instances it evokes a shocking reaction. The third time I watched this film, I was watching it with a group of friends who actually walked out shortly after this was revealed. People kept walking into the room and being like, "Harry, what the hell are you watching?" I looked at them with the biggest smile on my face and said, "It's a man walrus."
Show me how the fishies swim!
But a walrus is a mammal, you know, it swims fundamentally different to fish. Wallace gets pulled under and finds the corpse of another man walrus, realizing that he isn't the first victim of Howard's crimes. Meanwhile, Allie and Teddy get in touch with the authorities who connect him to a former Quebec police officer investigating a serial killer who may be Howard Ho.
I'm Guy Lapointe, that is my name, Guy Lapointe, and I spent 20 years as the inspector of the Sûreté du Québec.
This is Johnny Depp.
I have been hunting this Howard Howe, this elusive devil made of the flesh.
Back in 2014, when Johnny Depp was still one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, he took on a small role in this low-budget horror comedy because Quentin Tarantino turned down the role. Apparently Tarantino thought he was being offered the role of Wallace and that's why he turned it down, but still, I'm very happy with Johnny Depp in this role. He is hilarious. You can tell Johnny Depp's gimmicky performance is being used to distract from the fact that the story isn't actually going anywhere, but on rewatches, it isn't as gimmicky anymore. It loses its appeal because you want the story to start moving and it just doesn't. Also, since Johnny Depp isn't a big powerhouse celebrity anymore, more recognized now for being the victim of Amber Heard's abusive marriage to him, it just doesn't have the same level of shock value. Still, Johnny Depp captures Guy Lapointe with perfect attention to absurdity in line delivery and physicality.
I can almost smell his shit. Pardon my French.
How about the Gimli slider, no onions?
That's another obscure reference. In 1983, there was a plane that actually ran out of fuel 41,000 feet in the air and actually had to be glided to safety where it landed at a former Air Force base in Gimli, Manitoba. That's the Gimli glider.
Let me tell a story.
Here comes another flashback.
Good afternoon to you, sir. I am Guy Lapointe, Sûreté du Québec.
Oh, did you come here about this spider? I called the police 2 days ago because there's a big old spider in my body hole.
Your body hole?
The shitter!
The entire point of this scene is just to show Michael Parks and Johnny Depp competing with each other to try and chew more scenery than the other person. And it's funny, but it does go on for a long time, just like everything else in the film. They track Wallace's journey to the convenience store he stopped at.
Oh my god! It's Mr. Mustache! Colleen! Hurry up! I'm coming. Oh my god, what? No way, it's Mr. Mustache.
I love these girls. They seem like they're having the best time in this film. We get an extended version of the convenience store scene from earlier, which is composed entirely of alternate takes for some reason. It's the exact same thing, just with different footage. I don't get why. I mean, like, this version of the scene is funnier, but we didn't need to see it twice. And with the film dragging on enough already, showing us the same scene twice just makes things worse. Although there are some laughs.
That's me? That's my mustache?
Yep, I'm American. How are things over at Degrassi High? Do you ladies know where Bifrost is? Duh!
While sharing a dance with Wallace, he talked about how in desperation he killed the walrus he met on the island so he could feed, only moments before he was rescued. Burdened by the guilt over what he did, he performed his experiment on Wallace to bring back Mr. Tusk and harden him up so that he could give him a second chance at life.
We are about to find your friend and the dangerous man who took him. These are guns.
I don't want one.
You don't want a gun?
You take them.
What kind of American are you?
That is one of my favorite lines. Howard then reenacts his battle with Mr. Tusk, starting out for some reason in his own walrus suit before stepping out of it. Wallace stabs him in the foot with his tusk, knocking him down before he finishes the job. Ali and Teddy bust in, terrified at the sight of Wallace as a man-walrus. Except for the fact that now Wallace has stopped in, their entire plight to save Wallace seems really arbitrary, and oh my god, I just realized that his name is Wallace because it sounds like walrus. Jesus, I guess I'm a bit slow. Then we cut to 1 year later where Wallace had now been kept in an animal sanctuary. Ali and Teddy come to feed him, and then we get one more flashback, with this one showing Ali telling him about the time that her grandfather said crying is the thing that separates man from animals. Wallace then starts crying, reminding us of his humanity, and then the credits roll and we hear a segment of the podcast which inspired Tusk in the first place.
Here's the third act. He then goes and puts on his suit, made of human skins. And so you realize he's done this before. Like, I'm not the first lodger and shit like that.
Gotcha.
Is Tusk a good film?
Kinda.
Having seen Tusk a total of 5 times, I've had a lot of different reactions, but the one consistent reaction is that it does lose its appeal with repeated viewings. While Tusk was funny the first and second times I watched it, on its third, fourth, and fifth viewing, it just didn't do the same thing. That was probably because of the fact that I knew what was coming, so the shock factor didn't have as much power. If you don't know what to expect from Tusk, you're way more likely to appreciate it. If you do, well, the wait to get there, it just seems a lot more boring. Tusk really drags on. It's an 80-minute story trapped in a 105-minute film, which relies on the gimmicks of Michael Parks' monologues and tedious flashback scenes. Michael Parks is great, and his line delivery is engrossing, but Kevin Smith seems so much more interested in it than the audience is likely to be, and the constant flashbacks just keep interrupting the flow of things. It leaves Tusk feeling like 2 fundamentally different films, one of them which is a very realistic and down-to-earth look at a love triangle involving an asshole, his best friend, and his girlfriend, and another film which is a very absurd body horror film. There is humor to be found in these, but there is never really a feeling that they blend. One is real, one is absurd. They're both polar opposites, and they just clash. And the characterization in the film is annoying too. The entire cast of the film is great, with Justin Long being able to play such an awful person while also capturing our sympathies, Michael Parks calmly portraying an absolute madman, and Johnny Depp being downright hilarious. But none of the characters have sufficient dimension. Wallace is just an asshole, Howard is just a psycho with a walrus fixation, and Guy Lapointe is simply comic relief, but that one's okay because that's all he was ever meant to be. They're not interesting enough to carry the film through its long talkative scenes, and since this is a body horror film, the concept of a man being turned into a walrus is the far more interesting part of the premise. But we don't even get the reveal on that until we're 58 minutes into the film, beyond the halfway mark. The majority of the second half of the film doesn't even focus on Wallace trying to cope with being a walrus. It's mostly about the others trying to investigate his disappearance. From there, things just drag on until he fights Howard, which is when the story actually gets some traction again. But then things are over in the blink of an eye. Tusk starts with a breezy pace before suddenly slowing down monumentally for the most of the film, and then just deciding to rush to the conclusion. Pacing is not one of its strong suits. And it doesn't feel like it knows if it wants to be a horror comedy or a genuine body horror film or a character study. Whatever the hell it is, you'll need some patience to appreciate it. Still, I wouldn't call Tusk a bad film. Kevin Smith shows us with this movie and Red State that with the right gimmicks, he does know how to build an intense atmosphere and shock audiences. But the scenes in Tusk that show the eccentricities of Guy Lapointe and Wallace interacting with the airport security remind us that his best talents are working in comedy. I respect the fact that Kevin Smith wants to step outside the View Askew universe and work within different genres, and he shows us that he can do that with a good eye for imagery. He just needs to figure out when he's stretching his story too thin. Still, he does make Tusk into a funnier version of the Human Centipede. It isn't as shocking or confronting as that movie, but it does have the Kevin Smith comedic touch, which doesn't go unnoticed. Body horror and comedy are two genres that shouldn't typically cross, so Kevin Smith has a lot of ambition in trying to unite them. Admittedly, it does result in a lot of prolonged, drawn-out talking sequences, but there are some really funny moments of comedy and some really intense moments of horror, so he does his job a lot of the time. And even though on the fifth viewing, Tusk isn't as good as it was the first time, I can't disregard the feeling I got from the first two viewings. The first time, watching it in the cinema, it had me absorbed the whole time. I was shocked, and I was laughing, and I really attribute a lot of that to the detailed prosthetics of the walrus suit. That looked really good. And on the second viewing, when I showed it to my friend, we were both pissing ourselves, and we were shocked. I was laughing even more, because I was watching his horrified reactions to the horror scenes. Tusk doesn't have the same rewatch value as Kevin Smith's better films, but it does show us that when working outside the View Askew universe, he can still create something good in a different genre. That being said though, he did show us on Jay and Silent Bob Reboot that really is his finest kind of work. Tusk gets 5 hideously disfigured human bodies out of 10. It is well acted, intense, and funny at times, but it does stretch its premise a bit too thin with an excess of talking, a poor narrative structure, and really bad pacing. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. If there are any movies you want to see me discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. If you want to see more episodes of this show, please hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, until next time, I've been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace.